All right, we're live. Welcome everybody. It's Johhny, Scott. Today we're here with you with Assured DeFi. We have Chapo on board with us. Chapo, can you say hey to the people?
Hey guys, what's up?
It's great to have you here today, man. So we wanted to get straight to the source on this issue. Long story short, our community invests in a ton of DeFi projects. We're a little bit on the cutting edge, the bleeding edge, if you will, way down in that swamp. And we've noticed lately that there have been a plethora of rugs. It's just rug after rug after rug in a lot of these plays. And KYC services are getting a lot of attention during this. What they do, what the process actually is. So we thought we'd get straight to the source, bring you in, and you can explain to us, what it is that you do at Assure and how you're helping to make the space safer. Um, let's first start off with a brief description of the problem. Can you tell us, as you see it, as an expert in that field, why why scams are so prevalent today?
Yeah, well, it's a big question. Obviously, it's one that I think a lot of people are trying to answer all the way up to, the Biden's mandate and executive order to regulate. It's not an easy solution, first of all, and it is a big problem. Why do they exist today? Well, it's multifaceted. There's First of all, it's a global market. It's largely unregulated right now. And really, one of the biggest issues is that there are so many different paths to scamming. If it was simple and there was this one bottleneck, or one item that you could check off in order to prevent scams, they wouldn't exist. It would be easy to prevent. There's just so many attack vectors to try to squash that there's a lot of different ways that people can siphon money away from investors. That's really at its core what the real issue is. I've personally been in the space for 5 or 6 years. I was around just a couple years ago, like 2 or 3 years ago, when the way pre-sales were handled, where you sent money to a random ETH address and then crossed your fingers that you'd actually get tokens, and then crossed your fingers again that the Telegram group wouldn't disappear and that liquidity would actually get added. You know, we've We've come a long way. It's better now than it used to be. 4 years ago, code audits weren't even an investor expectation. Code auditing firms weren't readily available to do code audits, and their capabilities were poor in looking for things like honeypots and mint functions and this sort of thing. Um, so it takes time in order to develop like an infrastructure of investor safety and protections. And we're getting there, with launch pads who review projects and who handle liquidity locking platforms, team token locking, investing schedules, and the availability for that. Things like multi-sigs for treasuries, that's something that's new. There wasn't an expectation that this large pool of funds would be controlled by anybody else other than one anonymous person before. And that's starting to change. So, why are scams so prevalent? Well, there's a lot of money in this market. It moves extremely freely. It's not regulated. It's fully global. And the knowledge and experience of the people who are participating is limited compared to the bad actors. So that really creates an environment that is just rife for scams.
Yeah, absolutely. I think majority of the investors are very early in their investment career and stuff like that with crypto. They're hoping to get that get rich quick thing, and so I think all these scammers, they're pretty good at hacking things and creating false DApps and stuff like that. And I think that it lures those people in, and they know that they can make a quick buck off of those people.
Yeah, and if you combine that with the fact that law enforcement globally and regulations are behind, they're definitely behind the curve when you compare it to the development of the market. Most regulatory agencies and law enforcement agencies don't really have a clue as far as how to go about evaluating these things and investigating them, and they don't really have the capability and resources. It just creates an environment that it's not only easy to create scams, but it's difficult to create consequences for them. And so that there's a real asymmetric risk reward bet for when it comes to scamming right now, that needs to change before you're going to see any kind of meaningful impact.
Right.
I think you guys brought up an interesting point, and it's something that I always address first. I think everyone in this space, probably most people in our community, probably everyone in DeFi at this point has been rugged at least once. Wouldn't you guys say that's fair?
Oh yeah, for sure.
It's just kind of a rite of passage in the space. And one thing I think that people often miss in evaluating, if they do go back and evaluate why they just got rugged or why they've lost money, is their own behavior, right? You brought up, Scott, that a lot of times we're trying to get rich very quickly, and we're putting a lot of money in anonymous people's hands with very little control over what happens to it. And then I think a lot of times some of our own behavior actually isn't accounted for in the equation of why we're losing money. So that is something that I think people need to address. It's something that should be talked about. What would be some tips you guys might have for people, just talking very vaguely before we get into what Assure does, but about maybe what they should and shouldn't do with their money in terms of getting scammed?
Well, I think first of all, looking in the mirror is something that's hard for all of us.
Absolutely.
Whenever we lose money on an investment, whether it's because it was failed or whether it was because it was a scam, an outright fraud, I think the first thing everybody wants to do naturally is point the finger at somebody whose fault it was. And very rarely do you take the time to self-reflect and go look in the mirror and say, what did I do wrong? Because at the end of the day, you chose to put your money there, and it was a bad place to put your money. And so you are at fault as an investor. Taking the time to do that is something that is a great recommendation. If you lose money, what are you going to do next time so you don't get to that same point, and try to educate yourself? In one of the reasons why I'm just such a huge proponent of education is that I think if people were more knowledgeable about all of these attack vectors I spoke of, if they were knowledgeable about what a code audit is, what its purpose is, what it does for you as an investor, and also what it's not. What does it not protect you against? I think that's just as important. And I'd say most people participating in this space don't really have a very good concept of all the different ways they could get scammed, which should give them a roadmap when doing due diligence. And so I see a lot of, one of the things I always laugh about is people say, do your own research. We see that term a lot, right? DYOR, all over the place.
Yeah, everywhere.
But nobody knows how. The traditional investor has absolutely no idea what that means. Where do you do your research? What are you doing your research on? What specifically are you trying to identify in a project to make sure that the boxes are checked so that you have a safer, or you're mitigating the unnecessary risk when investing? Most people don't have that in their head, and there's not really agencies or companies out there to protect you, to put that one seal on it or one stamp that says that it's all been done, which means that onus really falls on you as an investor. And so if you're participating in this market without knowing that, you're doing yourself a great disservice, and you need to educate yourself.
Absolutely. So speaking of education, do you guys see yourself possibly getting into that little niche of, yes, you're doing the KYC stuff, but also the education of, these are the things to look for in a shady project?
I would say yes. We certainly, education for me personally has always been at the forefront of my mind, and trying to help people better understand this market. As a business, I feel like we have sort of an ethical responsibility to help people understand not just what we offer, but again, what it isn't, and what other attack vectors are out there that they should be looking for. We post tweets on kind of personal fund security and that sort of thing too. So I don't see us as an education company. We're a verification service, but I do see us having this broad type of overall just responsibility to help educate the market and help investors do better. I think
Right.
that, truthfully, it's good for business for us. Educated investors understand the value of what Assure provides, and educated people understand what Assure does and what it means and the value of it. But also the most educated understand that we're just a small piece of the overall investor safety or risk mitigation market. And Assure isn't even involved with 90% of what goes into making a project safe. So we want our investors to be educated. It avoids a lot of the FUD associated with us as a business when things go wrong, if people are educated about what it is and what it isn't.
Right.
And yeah, that's a great point, because I think a lot of the heat that I've been seeing on Twitter, especially lately, has been people who have a drastic misunderstanding about what being KYC'd does and does not protect from. So let's take it in that direction for a moment. Let's say I'm an investor and I'm looking into a DeFi project, right? And I see that they have been KYC'd by Assure DeFi. What expectation should I have? Like, what value should I place on that? What risks does it help mitigate, and what does it not touch?
Yeah, great question. So we work with both public and or doxed, if you want to call them that, teams, and also anonymous teams. Regardless of whether somebody's public, doxed, or anonymous, the truth is they're anonymous until they've been KYC'd by a trusted third party. If I go, for instance, if I go and I show you a video of me and I say I'm Satoshi, and then I create a LinkedIn that says I'm Satoshi, and I get on video and I come with the whole community and I say, hey guys, it's Satoshi, I'm not Satoshi, right? So this whole concept of being doxed or creating these public personas, until you have a third party who's reviewing identity documents and doing facial recognition and checks on the document validity themselves and making sure that we actually know that this person is who they say they are, which is what the KYC process is, it doesn't really matter whether you had somebody on video or not. You still have an anonymous person, and there's still a lack of accountability and recourse on the back end if it's a bad actor. So the value of having a KYC in place is that somebody's gone through that know your customer process, who's also taken accountability from a legal perspective for the project. So you may see a lot of times somebody gets up on live video and says, yep, okay, this is who I am. All right, great. Something bad happens, and then they'll shift the blame and say, well, I wasn't really the one responsible for it. Well, if nobody's taken legal ownership or claim or responsibility for a project, in a lot of ways, if they were standing in the court of law, the judge would say, well, there's nothing really here that ties them to say that they were responsible for this bad event. And so even if you do know who they are, there's an issue. So what Assure does is basically at a real high level, twofold. We take somebody who's real in the real world, and we have them take legal accountability and ownership of the project and the liability for what happens. And then we go through a robust identity verification process on that person or those people so that we securely store the identities of those who are responsible and who have taken accountability for the project. Now, that's it. That's our business model. And then we issue a public kind of, I'll say, compliance certificate and documentation that investors can see who we've done, who has gone through that process and who hasn't. What's the value of it? Well, I'd say at a high level, again, there's a value that you have to place in having a real identity behind a project, period. Knowing who somebody is doesn't prevent them from going to commit a crime, but certainly it's a deterrent for people because there aren't too many scammers that are brazen enough or dumb enough to go give their full identity information to us and then go commit a major financial crime. I think given that the market doesn't really expect that yet, it's a really large risk for somebody to take if they are a bad actor when there's plenty of fully anonymous people who are raising funds right now and don't have to provide that legal recourse.
Sure. So let's talk about when a company comes to you, right? Essentially what they're doing is they're providing you with legal documentation from whatever their country of origin is that's going to prove their identity that's on file, correct? Something like a passport, driver's license, state issued ID.
That's right. Yep.
Okay. And then you all are conducting what we would call a liveness check or some type of verification process that's going to confirm that the person on the ID is also the person you're dealing with, right?
Correct.
Correct. And then you're going to conduct some type of process that assures that the person who is bringing you this documentation and who you've now verified is the person on this documentation is
Yep.
also in charge of the project, right? So they can make transactions from the wallets, etc.
I want to make a quick clarification here. Our current process does not have any contract ownership verification or validity that they own a particular wallet. What we have right now is they're signing up that they are taking legal ownership and accountability through the document that they sign. So
okay. All right, perfect.
It's not, there's no contract ownership verification that Assure does at this point. It's
Okay,
something
all right.
that we're looking at potentially integrating, but there's some challenges there also. But right now, we kind of begin with the end in mind. So again, if you're standing in a court of law, what do you care about? You care about somebody having taken legal ownership and accountability for the project.
Perfect. And that's why I'm asking, because like I said, there's a lot of these issues that I think people have a false expectation of and don't know exactly what the process is going on. So I think the other thing is that people may not understand that when you get these documents from the person who's applying with Assure, you're storing them, I would assume, encrypted on a server, right?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay.
We've got some details about our document storage policy online if anybody wants to get into the weeds. But yes, it's encrypted and it's stored on a decentralized server.
But let's say that someone does commit a crime. They commit a rug. I think it's important for people to be aware that those documents are never going to be released to the public at large. Am I correct?
That's our policy. That's correct. Now, that I wouldn't say that's the case for all KYC out there. That's our own policy, is that we don't publicly release documents, and I can get into a little bit of the reasoning behind that. But there are KYC companies out there that make a judgment if a negative event has occurred, and they will publicly release documents. We do not.
Okay. And I would assume the reasons for and against that have something to do with, witch hunting, et cetera, the uncertainty of, you release someone's information out there, and then if they are hurt, even if they were a bad actor, there would be both legal and moral liability for that, correct?
That's certainly a big part of it. Unlike a lot of the KYC entities out there, Assure DeFi is a registered LLC in the United States, and I'm the owner of it. And being a registered LLC in a company means that we can be sued. And I put way too much into Assure for us to publicly release an identity, end up having it be some type of misunderstanding about the way that funds went, or that it wasn't truly a scam, have something happen, and ultimately we'd be liable for that.
Exactly.
Truthfully, the bigger reason, and a lot of people view that as, wow, well, you're protecting your own ass for the sake of these scammers. Okay, that's one perception, but I would say the bigger reason why we don't do it that way is that you have to look at what you're trying to accomplish. Okay, and when you release a public identity like that, what good does that serve? What happens next? Just having a public identity, does that get funds back? Does that put somebody in jail? Does that file police reports? The answer is no, no, and no. You don't need an identity to file criminal reports. If you see somebody go rob a bank, you don't need their passport information to go tell the police about it. Okay? You go and you tell the police that I saw the guy rob the bank, and the bank has video footage of him. It's very similar to how it would look here. I see that somebody stole the funds, they rugged the project. Assure DeFi has the owner information. That's all you need for a police report. So if somebody's not going to submit a police report or a criminal report without the ID, what makes you think that they would go take the time to submit the police report with the ID?
And I think that is probably key to helping people understand what the process is for anyone listening, or for anyone who's going to watch this video in the future. If you don't understand how legal process works, what you're going to have to do if you're rugged, and let's say you know that the project is KYC'd by Assure, you're going to have to file a police report with the law enforcement jurisdiction who is in that area, whatever it may be. Now, whatever area of the globe it's in, or whatever area of the United States it might be in, different states will have different jurisdictions, down all the way to municipal jurisdictions, all the way up to state, federal, etc. You will have to get with the one who will address that financial issue, and then you will have to have them serve legal process to assure. Would that be an accurate statement?
100%.
Okay.
You've got it. Yep.
And
And
basically
sure,
they will go
we
on with the investigation from there, right? It's not something that the consumer has to try to dig up these people and find out any further issues, right?
Well, that's right. I mean, at the end of the day, you've got civil type of recourse and you have criminal recourse. If you want to try to get funds back or funds recovered, that's more of a civil type of suit, and you may have to pay for investigations or pay a fund recovery expert in order to go get money back. If the goal is to put these people in jail and to make sure they're not scam again and get criminal type of recourse against these people who committed the crimes, that's the job that these law enforcement agencies around the world, that is their responsibility. And Assure is really here to facilitate that process. Going back to why there's so many scams, here's the reality of the current state of the market, right? Now that we've getting into what happens in case of scam, the reality is when a scam occurs, most normal investors, they're not capable of putting together a sufficient evidence package. So when they go, even if they wanted to report, they don't really have the means of doing blockchain history, fund tracing. They're not going to take the time to put together this full report as far as what was promised, what happened, the timeline of events, all the contract addresses, the transaction history. And so they don't even have really, I'll say you don't have the goods. Even if the FBI was sitting there at your door, you don't have the goods to give the FBI that the FBI could go do something with.
Exactly.
The second element of that is that, like you said, who do you report it to? Well, I got to tell you, that's a really complicated question. When it comes to the nature of scams here, who has jurisdiction? Who cares? Whose responsibility would it fall under? Who do you go report it to? How do you report it? This is why things aren't getting reported. Nobody knows. 99.99% of people would have no idea whether this falls under the FBI's jurisdiction or the SEC's or the AMF in France or Europol, or nobody knows. That's a highly specialized type of question. And because nobody knows whether they're even reporting it to the right agency and doesn't have links for reporting, nobody reports it. They don't have the information to report and they don't even know how to report it. So if you don't have either of those items, how much is really getting reported now?
Yeah, I think we're touching on many of the deep issues involved in this. And so I would assume then that the order of operations that this occurs is once someone KYCs with Assure and there's a claim that a rug happens, do you all, before we proceed down this, do you all monitor that individually with the projects that come to you, or do you wait for someone to report it to you before you look at it any further?
We are not proactively, I mean, we have 250 plus clients now and growing every week. It would be impossible for us to do live monitoring on all projects. So our process relies on crowdsourced community intelligence to start the investigative process.
So basically they get that someone would come to you and say, hey, Assure, these guys that you KYC just rugged this project.
Yep.
Then you would take it from there and you would be able to report or have the information and maybe assist them on who to report it to.
Yeah, I'll get into some of the details of our process. I released a pretty long thread a week or two ago about what our back-end process looks like. So maybe I can just give you a high level on really what that is, and I think it would be good to talk about, since a lot of the discussion here is focused around what happens if a KYC project, scams. So like I said, first step is that we rely on crowdsourced community intelligence. So we have a scam reporting form that we ask that any affected community members fill out. And that reporting form allows people to include files, give a brief description and detailed description of what happened. Obviously, those types of reports that come in from the community have a very wide range of depth. Some of them say, I got scammed, I lose money, and that's all we get.
Yeah.
Some of them are their own blockchain forensics people, and they're including transaction links and screenshots and all sorts of great information that provides us with a real starting point for an investigation. So the backend process starts there, and the answer is, just like almost every project in crypto gets called a scam, we've gotten scam reports from projects that are really, I'll just be honest with you, they're completely unwarranted. You know, they're upset that the price has dropped, but nothing malicious has happened. So we do a manual review internally of every single scam report that we receive. We have a way to aggregate all of them. So essentially, on our end, any report that's submitted for a given project all goes together. And so we can get a pretty good feel for, on our end, of the total information that has been crowdsourced from all of the community reports for a given project. When we have a sense that there's really the potential that something bad did happen, and it's like, we have some information here which hasn't been verified necessarily, but it looks like a potential fraud, scam, rug, whatever you want to call it, has occurred. It's at that point where we'll launch our own internal investigation. And we use that crowdsourced community information as a baseline and a starting point for our own investigation. That makes sense so far?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. So basically, it starts with the crowdsourced intelligence, but that's really just step one. After we manually review, aggregate all the information that gets submitted, we do our own internal investigation with our resources within Assure, which may include open source intelligence, interviews, some blockchain analysis, transaction history reviews, social media, what was said, that sort of thing. We then partner with some people who focus in the industry on deeper levels of investigative intelligence. These are blockchain forensics experts, fund tracing experts, and they do things like leverage their tools like breadcrumbs or chainalysis, and they'll do event timelines, time clustering, device fingerprinting. They'll even get into some IP histories sometimes. We'll do fund tracing down to figure out, after the rug happened, where did the funds end up? Did they get taken to a centralized exchange? Can we identify those transactions where they may have ended up in a KYC'd wallet? This is a process that doesn't happen overnight, right? Everybody expects that the minute something happens, they basically say, Assure, what the hell are you doing about it? Now, it's funny, right? Because this isn't our responsibility as a company. I've personally made it a mission to take it on because I think it's right for the investment community. But what Assure's responsibility is to legally tie a real world identity to a project and go through the identity verification and securely store the ID. That's where Assure's responsibilities end. However, I think, just like we talked about, if no reports are going to get filed, and the only way that we can use the identity information we have on file is if people go through this formal reporting process and law enforcement contacts us, it's important for us to really drive the end result that we want, to have some of this capability and to help facilitate it. And so when we have issues like this as a business, and this is really where Assure is the gold standard of KYC in the space. I personally created this market back at the end of 2020, after I got rugged for 6 figures myself. And I told myself that there just has to be a better way. Built the company in first quarter of last year. And since, we've been developing and refining our processes, refining our policies, enhancing the way that we address these things on the back end. And since then, we've had countless copycats come out. And now, even as recently as last month, Certic released their KYC service. But where we're really differentiated, and where no other KYC company other than Assure is going, is this whole question of what happens when someone rugs. Since everybody should know that KYC doesn't prevent rugs, what happens when fraud occurs? And this is really the key point to understand, is that Assure is tackling this and no other company in the world is. So we're paying for funding and facilitating a deeper dive when we have an event occur, with, like I said, forensics partners, private investigators. And what that leads to is a more comprehensive report that we issue, called our Assure Investigative Intelligence Report. We just released our first one for Atom Protocol. We have another one or two that's on the way. And it outlines everything that we've been able to find through this investigative process. It includes the crowdsourced information. It also includes what we've funded for deeper dive investigation done by blockchain forensics experts. And ultimately what that provides is it's a report that has a summary of the protocol, background on what occurred, a full true timeline of events, and in most cases, it will provide proof that a fraudulent event occurred in addition to the ultimate source of funds. Now, that's the report that I say that most common investors, they're not capable of producing themselves. And it's really what the FBI and any law enforcement agency needs in order to take action. So we create that report based on all that. The end of the report provides specific recommendations for adversely impacted investors, such as contact these specific agencies that have jurisdiction along with links. We have a legal team and we actually have dual legal representation, and we're likely going to be taking on a third where they're focused on criminal prosecution globally in crypto. And we use them as a resource in order to provide guidance on what agencies this should be reported to based on the nature of the crime and the jurisdiction of the identified parties. And we can give people some very specific next steps for them as action items to go do, along with links, and use this report that we create as the backup documentation or evidence package that they can deliver to start the investigative process by the agencies.
So that was a lot of information. And I think for people who are listening, let's synopsize it. Let's boil it down. Essentially, when someone believes they've been rugged, they can fill out your form that you have, correct?
Yep, we've got a scam reporting form for them.
Exactly, a scam reporting form. You all then essentially do all of the background computer forensic work, if you will, to kind of see if this is someone that's just unhappy with the way that a certain project went, or if it was an actual rug, if actual funds look like they were stolen. You'll compile wallet addresses, transaction histories, etc., things that maybe people who aren't that great at doing these investigations aren't going to be able to do. And you will have that for law enforcement that would contact you, correct?
We make that public. It's not something that's just for law enforcement when they contact us. We actually provide recommendations at the end of that report. Not only does it have all the information, but it provides recommendations to the investors as the injured parties to go file the report, but to report it to those law enforcement agencies. But what we create, that investigative intelligence report, is something investors can basically just take, save, and attach to the report, because that's really the evidence that it occurred.
Absolutely. And so then if, let's say, law enforcement did contact you, obtain the information of whoever the person was that conducted the scam,
Yep.
The consumer would be able to file a Freedom of Information Act for those law enforcement documents, find out what the identity was and what the law enforcement investigation reveals, and then they could file a civil suit.
Yeah, I mean, I'll clearly, I haven't been down that road yet where somebody's been able to file a Freedom of Information Act, and I'm not an attorney, so I can't say who would have access to the information, but I think you're definitely going down the right path there. That all sounds right to me. Yes.
Yeah, so basically, for anyone that doesn't know, law enforcement documents in the United States are all covered under the Freedom of Information Act, which basically means that if law enforcement is conducting an investigation, obviously there are certain limitations, but you can obtain documents from that investigation by filing this with the jurisdiction. So if people would know what jurisdiction has contacted you to get the KYC documents, they would be able to file these acts with their own attorneys and be able to sue these people, theoretically, at least. Once again, that's the way that it's supposed to function. So that would be the link there. So let's go a little bit further then. You make this public facing document and it's released to everyone. You tell them, who they have to file with, who they have to, report to. You're doing a lot of work that's not even involved in the KYC process. How many people, do you have statistics on how many people actually are reporting any of this? Like that's the question that I want to know. A lot of times people are complaining that nothing's being done, but I would like to know if you have any inside information on how many people are actually filing reports.
I don't. It's something that I'd love to know. And a lot of times when people come to us and they're complaining about a project that we've verified that has rugged, and we go back to them, or they say, well, has Assure filed the police report? Most of the time we go back to them and say, have you? Right? Because Assure isn't the injured party here. And there's actually a lot of law enforcement agencies around the world that won't even consider reports unless they're coming from the injured party.
No, you're correct. Most law enforcement is going to want what they'll call a victim or the complainant, and the complainant
That's
has
right.
to be an injured party. So Assure is not an injured party. They're simply a service provider. They're not going to be able to make police
Yep.
reports on your behalf.
You got it. Exactly. And so what we want to do as a business is we want to facilitate the process to make it easy for people to report, since we feel like one of the biggest gaps in that whole process is the fact that it's not easy to report. Even if somebody is an injured party and they're mad as hell and they want to go and report it, they don't know who to report it to and they don't have the information to report, which means that it just doesn't happen. This whole process that I just outlined is really geared towards making it easy for people to report. And I know, the first one that we released on Atom Protocol here about a week ago, it was pretty cool to see a couple tweets out from people that said, wow, based on what Assure did with this report, I just reported it to the AMF in France and Europol, and it took me a total of 5 minutes, and this report was so easy to attach, and the links were right there, and encouraging other people to do it. And, that felt good as the owner of the business, that was really the whole purpose of what we put together here, and all the work and money that we've spent in order to get to this point for projects was so that people would actually report it. So I don't know how many people have. At the end of the day, I hope that number continues to go up all the time as they see these reports come out and as we help facilitate that process. I've got to imagine it's a lot higher for projects, or it certainly will be in the future, a lot higher for projects that have been KYC'd by Assure than projects that aren't, right?
Yeah, I would. So I think that what you've said, especially, dealing with, I think now that we have the process out there, that people need to understand that this is only going to get better if the community, if the DeFi community as a whole really starts to report these things, right? It's the same as any type of other crime. If people online can take your money and no one will take the documents that a KYC company like Assure will provide you and make reports with law enforcement, then it's never going to be investigated, and nothing will change over the long term.
Yep. I think that the onus really comes back to the affected investor or the injured party, and it always has to. It's twofold. What you said is exactly right. It's never going to get better until we start actually providing quality reports to law enforcement who can interpret those, see that the malicious act occurred, have an identity tied to it, and go do their job. At that point, it's like, here's a case that's wrapped up on a bow. And I always make this statement. We're wrapping up a case on a bow for law enforcement. Here's all of the evidence of what happened. Here's who has the actual ID of who was responsible and somebody who has signed up for legal accountability for this event. Like, I don't know how much more tied up on a bow you could make it for a law enforcement agency. But if they have that, and at that point they don't go do their job, there's just only so much we can do. Right?
Absolutely. And to be clear, I think some people probably need to understand this too, because we talk about filing reports and this, that, or the other. I want people to understand, who may be listening to the stream, it doesn't cost anything to file a report with law enforcement. It's as simple as calling them on a phone and sending them an email with the document that Assure is going to provide you, correct?
Correct.
Right. So
That's
you're not
exactly
going to
right.
have to get a lawyer. This is not an expensive legal process. You literally
No.
just have to call the law enforcement agency, get a hold of an investigator. They'll provide you an email address and you can send them this document. It shouldn't take you
Yep.
a long time. It's just something you're going to have to show a little bit of, you're going to have to do it yourself, because once again, most law enforcement agencies will not accept a report from a separate, uninvolved business that was not the victim of the crime, right?
That's right. Most of them will want to see them from the injured party. A lot of them have online reporting forms. You don't even have to pick up the phone. And a good portion of them accept anonymous reports. So you don't even have to identify who you are. You can just go submit it and it's one more. And obviously, just like every single law enforcement agency from the beginning of time, the more reports that they get, the higher it gets prioritized. So it's important that everybody who's been affected submits the report, and hopefully that moves it up on their priority list of something that they're going to take action against and, accelerate an investigative process on their side.
I think that's a great point to make too. So the difference between, let's say, there's a rug pull, it's somewhere in the United States and the FBI is going to deal with it. The FBI gets one report about this. It may or may not motivate them depending on the size of the money stolen, right? Let's say they get 60, 70, 80. Let's say they get 500 reports. That's going to be a completely different situation.
Totally.
So the process for people, once again, just to clarify, someone KYCs with Assure. What people should not expect is that their money cannot be stolen, correct?
Correct.
Exactly. Nothing that any KYC company is going to be able to do is going to keep you from being rugged. It's not a preventative measure, other than that the person might think twice about giving their information to a KYC company if they know
deterrent. Yes, deterrent, not prevention.
Perfect. Yeah, a perfect way to say that. It can provide deterrence, but it cannot stop anyone from stealing your money. Assure, let's say that the rug pull then does happen. Assure cannot get you your money back. Right? That would be a civil process that you would have to do that may or may not be successful, and that's going to take a long time. Those processes take years normally. Anyone that's ever been involved in a lawsuit can tell you it's not quick. But the thing that you can do is you can file the scam reporting form with Assure. You can then take the report that they will provide you, and you can get that to the law enforcement agency that they recommend at the bottom of the form. And the more people that do that, there's much higher of a likelihood that law enforcement will take action and will be able to do something to address the people in charge of the rug. Would that be a fair way to say it?
Yeah.
We've been going for about 45 minutes, guys. I think we've gotten a lot of information out there to the people. Can you tell us, kind of as we draw this all together, I think we have a good idea now of what people can expect from your KYC service and what they should do on their own behalf. Can you kind of tell us what are you moving forward towards in the future? Are you going to continue to add more services to then KYC to what you provide? How do you see this space evolving, I guess would be a good question.
Well, without giving away the farm here and our company secrets about where we're headed as a business, since we are the pioneers in this space, and everybody else in the KYC market is lagging, and following. I can say that we are certainly looking at offering more services than just KYC, and creating new innovative verification services that don't exist in the market today. There are other things about projects, about wallets, about treasuries that have really not been brought to DeFi that would still add value to the investor and help create a safer investment environment with less unnecessary risk. And so we do have other services that we're planning on bringing to the market. With respect to KYC, we have a long way to go on KYC too. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. We created this market last year. We are 1 year into the venture of totally educating investors like we are here today, and creating our own service and refining all of our policies and refining how we do our verification itself, and what information we take on the upfront side, and how we further vet people who are coming in, and how we do a better job at tying them to projects and that sort of thing. Which is extremely complicated. In a global market, that's not an easy task. And we've spent the better part of the last year getting better at it. This whole process on the back end, when we talk about investigations, where our business is headed, like I said, that's very different than almost every other KYC company in the world, is that we want to be involved with that process. And that's a whole nother can of worms. When you look at everything that might be required on the back end, like open source intelligence and the blockchain forensics piece and the fund tracing and device fingerprinting and physical geolocation of people, and something you got into briefly was fund recovery. Don't rule that out from us. I think the biggest win for investors is when they get money back. And ultimately, we're here for the investors. We're not here for the projects. We want to make our service so good for investors that investors stop giving their money to projects who haven't gone through this.
I think that's a great goal. And I think investors would love to feel that that is the place the space exists in, that if they see an Assure stamp on something, they know this is something I can put my money into and I won't have to run the same risks as a random anon project.
Right. And I get I totally get the perception out there of, well, what's Assure doing about it? Because you see projects that have been KYC'd with us and have funds been returned? No. Is there somebody in jail? No. And they say, well, then Assure's bullshit and it doesn't provide any value. I'd argue that putting somebody in jail and recovering funds wasn't the purpose of our business to start, but a lot of that onus comes back on the individual investor. And we've provided that accountability path so that there is a real path for you getting funds back, and there is a real path for criminal prosecution now because of the process that we have in place. But actually taking it all the way, to the finish line there right now largely falls on the investor. And a lot of our focus is facilitating that process for investors so that fund recovery is an easier path, so that criminal prosecution and reporting is an easier path. And some of the stuff that we've talked about on this call lends itself towards that, but we're not there yet. This report that we issue is this investigative report and providing recommendations and links as far as jurisdictions and all that kind of stuff. It's all great, and that definitely helps move the needle. But we have plans in the future to potentially get involved with fund recovery and some other aspects of the actual reporting side and investigative side that we're not there yet, but deepening that process with partners and attorney relationships and global law enforcement and strengthening the people that we have working with us on the back end is certainly a big area of focus for us.
Excellent. And just to tidy it up, for anyone that doesn't know, I would assume your scam reporting forms are just available on your website. Is that where people can find those?
Yep, I'd be happy to drop a link here. I think I can drop a link in the YouTube channel if you'd want.
Perfect. Yeah, if you could just drop that down there so people can have an easy access point in case they want to get a hold of these documents and start that process. Scott, anything else you have that I may have failed to touch on?
No, not really. I think everything was basically covered. There's a couple people asking about Atom Protocol in the YouTube chat, just about like what happened and stuff like that. Can you elaborate on that at all for them?
Sure. I mean, Atom Protocol was one of the clients that we KYC'd. It was the first Assure DeFi investigative intelligence report that we issued. I think we had released that about a week ago. So you should see that. It's actually our pinned tweet on our Twitter right now. If you read through it, it's about a 9-page report that has the details of everything that happened, and also, which basically formed the baseline for an evidence package. There's recommended action items for anybody who was adversely affected, just like we talked about, that included the Europol cybercrime and AMF reporting links, as well as a request a week ago to contact finance support since some of the funds ended up on a centralized exchange and requesting that those got frozen. There's also, in our investigative reports, we state what the next steps for Assure are related to it as well. So all that should be pretty clear and outlined for anybody that has questions. In case you missed it, just check out our pinned tweet and make sure you read that report.
Awesome. Yeah, I think you covered everything there. So,
well, thanks. Yeah, thanks so much for coming and taking the time to talk to us. I think education, as you talked about in the beginning, is going to be one of the real important steps that everyone needs to take. I want people from our community that may be listening or that come in and watch the video later to understand you're going to have to, especially in DeFi right now, until this gets regulated, you're going to have to take ownership into your own hands of most of keeping your money safe. Sure, other services like it can do what they can to try to provide you with, like you said, some type of deterrence, and they can try to provide you with steps. I really like their action report that makes it easy for you to get a hold of law enforcement, and a lot of our community wouldn't be able to do the technical work behind the scenes to have the wallet addresses, the transactions, the proof to even show law enforcement. So I think that's a very valuable service. But ultimately, keeping our money safe is going to come down to us. You're going to have to take that into your own hands. So even if a project is KYC'd, please, guys, invest small portions of your portfolio. If you're going to invest at all, understand none of this is financial advice. No one can tell you something safe just because it's KYC'd with a certain project. Really do your own research, do your own due diligence, and keep yourself safe out there. Any last thoughts from either of you?
Nope.
No, the only thing I'd leave you all with is that, Assure has been the leader in the KYC space, and KYC is very new. And the way I like to try to summarize it all is that KYC is a lot like code auditing. There's a lot of parallels that can be drawn. I was around when audits weren't an expectation for projects, and they've become an expectation for projects. It's part of our job as an investment community to demand better from projects. The only reason why project owners are getting all of their projects audited now isn't because they're worried their code isn't safe. It's because investors are demanding it, and they're not going to give them funds, or they're not going to give them as much funding if they don't get their code audited. The same type of thing we're going to see here in the KYC space. I'm very convinced of that. But just like code audits, all KYCs are not created equal. All code audits aren't created equal. There's good code auditors who do their job and do thorough reviews and also, really provide good protection. There's other code auditors that do a once over for $800 or $500 and run it through an automated system that doesn't really do a whole lot of checks and then put their stamp on it. That's not really worth a damn. All KYCs aren't equal either. And you're going to find a really wide array of what KYC companies really do from a verification standpoint on the upfront side, and this whole process of what they do when one of their projects has a negative event on the backside. And how much value you place in a KYC by Assure DeFi versus a KYC by Pink Sale or somebody else who is literally running $1.50 check on somebody and then doing nothing with no process on the back end. You need to make that decision for yourself, just like you do when you place value in whether a project has been audited or not. It's not a simple yes or no. So I'd just leave you with that. You'd find a very different conversation and a very different answer if you ask some of these questions to different KYC providers who have followed in Assure's footsteps, because they're not nearly as far along in the development or process. And truthfully, most of them have no intention of putting something like this in place.
And I think that's an excellent point. A lot of times you see the original innovator will continue to innovate, whereas some copycats, they're going to try to take a share of the market share, but they're not going to definitely lead in the space. So we appreciate what you're trying to do. We understand a lot of FUD comes along in this space, period. But I do believe that services such as yours are necessary to take us into the next place. This is all going to be regulated eventually. Someday we'll all be sitting here 5 years in the future, and there will be a government mandated process that all this stuff has to go through. But until then, I think it's going to be interesting to watch how it develops, and I want our community to keep pushing. I want protocols like yours to keep pushing and to try to make DeFi a safer space for us all to play in.
You're definitely right about that. I tell a lot of people, regulation is coming whether you like it or not, and it's really good for us. We need to embrace it because the space can't continue to grow with the way that it is right now. And the real question is, who do you want writing the regulation or figuring out how to do a better job regulating? Is it, the government who comes in without a whole lot of knowledge about how the space works and all of the complexities of it? Or would you rather companies and projects like Assure DeFi trying to navigate the nuances of DeFi and anonymity and crypto and figure out best practices where you can create win-wins for both investors and good project owners alike?
I think that's a great point, and that's what we need to keep an eye on in the future. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for taking the time to have this conversation, and we look forward, as things develop in the future, to maybe having you back on and addressing anything else that you guys have going on at Assure.
Cool. Thank you guys for the support, and certainly appreciate the opportunity to come on and chat for a little while.
Yeah,
Appreciate it, man.
guys.